What do you do when an entire organization that claims to be doing good goes rogue? Stay tuned. Welcome back to another week of Explain, another week where we engage the culture from a biblical perspective in a manner which glorifies God. And this week we're going to be talking about the ERLC. That is an acronym which stands for the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission. This is a specific arm of the Southern Baptist Convention, also known as the SBC. And there have been some very interesting things that have happened surrounding the ERLC in I would say, the last 24 hours, 24 to 48 hours, I guess. The ERLC is currently led by Brent Leatherwood, and as I just said a few moments ago, this ERLC has gone the wrong direction. They've gone the wrong direction. And so today I'm going to be, first of all, kind of just looking at the narrative, the story of what's gone on over the last 24 to 48 hours. And I'm just going to put all the information on the table and let you make the decision. What do you do when an organization like this goes rogue? All right. So I guess this all starts with a little bit of background. Okay. And I'll tie this back in at the end. But the ERLC used to be led by a man named Russell Moore. We've talked about him in the past. The ERLC did not do very well under Russell Moore. There were a lot of very questionable things that came out of his tenure there. But needless to say, when Russell Moore stopped being the guy running the ERLC, Brent Leatherwood took over. And you fast forward to you may remember when when this school Covenant out in Tennessee became the victim of a murder, of a shooting. These 6 individuals were killed by a shooter, a transgender shooter. And shortly after that whole thing happened, a manifesto was reported to be forthcoming. Apparently, I guess the police had obtained a manifesto from the shooter that the shooter had written about basically what was in the works, what the shooter planned on doing, was written down in this manifesto. And needless to say, for the next long period of time, just up until the last 24 hours, okay, Brent Leatherwood played a big part in not having that released. And, you start to wonder why that is, right? I mean, I struggle to even find words to understand why that is, right? You have these little Christian children who get murdered in cold blood by this shooter, and the shooter had a manifesto. You'd think that at least people would have the right to know about that. And people would have the right to know what was in there. I'll get back to that story in just a little bit because there's an interesting tie-in to what's going on now. But fast forward to the present day, the ERLC has made many, many blunders. Also, very noteworthy. I don't even want to call them blunders because it's just openly rejecting what is right. They've sidestepped the issue of abortion. There have been some instances where the ERLC has claimed to be pro-life, right? I mean, they've for years said that they are pro-life, but there have been many opportunities for them to boldly proclaim what they believe about protecting the lives of the unborn, and they've soft-shoed and sidestepped the issue in on many different occasions. So there is that. Okay, there's that whole part of it as well. So now we're at the present day, where at the Southern Baptist Convention's annual meeting, we're now just hours removed from the ending of that. And you may remember last week we talked about the law amendment. We talked about that was basically an amendment that was just affirming what the Bible says about how only men should hold the office of pastor. I think many of us thought that would pass, but unfortunately it didn't. And there's a whole backstory behind that. There's a whole backstory behind that. Potentially even to the point where there was an organization called the NAMB who were potentially flying in votes basically from all over the place to try and tip the scales. And ultimately they did. Situations like this call for a 2/3 majority in order for something like this to be passed. And the law amendment fell just short at 61%. But that happened. But for the purpose of what we're talking about today, there was another very, very interesting part to this whole convention where Tom Ascol, who we've talked about several times, wonderful pastor in the SBC, stepped up and he basically gave his reasons why he thinks that the ERLC should be abolished. And so this gets back to our question, like, what do you do in a situation where an organization that claims to be doing good goes rogue? Well, we're going to talk about that now. Let's look at this first of all. So Tom Ascol basically proposed that the SBC abolish the ERLC. And rather than try to explain why he said that, I'm just going to let his words speak for himself. He released a thread on X, basically talking about why he thinks that this should happen. This was released on the 11th, so that was on Tuesday night. Tom Ascol says, for the vote to discontinue the ERLC tomorrow, here are some important facts. Bylaw 25 says no entity shall be discontinued without a majority vote at 2 successive annual sessions of the convention. For context, this would be the first of the 2. So a positive vote to discontinue the ERLC will not mean it's instantly abolished. Rather, it will send a clear message from the churches that we want greater responsiveness and accountability, and will give notice that they have 1 full year to make corrections. So basically calls for almost a probationary year, right? Where it's like they're on notice now. They got to do some things. They got to right a lot of the wrongs that have been committed over the past few years. So let's continue. The ERLC has suffered mission drift over the last several years and has moved further and further away from the will of the churches. Evidence for this is abundant, from animal rights issues to gun control to abortion. For example, in 2021, the SBC passed a resolution on abolishing abortion, which says, resolved that we affirm the murder of preborn children is a crime against humanity that must be punished equally under the law, and be it further resolved that as Southern Baptists we will engage with God's help in establishing equal justice and protection for the preborn according to the authority of God's word as well as local and federal law. Okay, so basically what that would affirm is the idea of equal protection. So if a child is murdered in the womb, it would be treated legally like a murder case. Right, like just as if a child outside the womb was killed, right? So that would be what's going on there. Ascol continues, yet 1 year later, the ERLC contradicted this resolution when Brent Leatherwood added his name to an open letter to state lawmakers from America's leading pro-life organizations that says, as national and state pro-life organizations representing tens of millions of pro-life men, women, and children across the country, let us be clear. We state unequivocally that we do not support any measures seeking to criminalize or punish women, and we stand firmly opposed to include such penalties in legislation. This letter, in direct violation of the will of SBC messengers, was used to kill House Bill 813, Abolition of Abortion in Louisiana Act of 2022. Oh, that was a big one. There was a lot behind that, but basically this was a bill that was going to abolish abortion. That would have been huge, but this bill was shot down as a result of what was said here by Leatherwood and others. For more information on how the ERLC cooperated in causing this legislation to fail, see this article. All this stuff is going to be linked down in the description so that you can go follow all the links just like normal. More could be said and will be said when the motion to dissolve the ERLC comes to the floor of the SBC tomorrow, but this is enough to demonstrate the need to let this agency know that headquarters want the mission drift to end and a correction is needed. Again, a positive vote will not end the ERLC immediately, but it will send a needed message and give the ERLC a year to make needed course corrections. So join me in voting to do just that at the SBC 2024 meeting Wednesday at 8:50 a.m. Yeah, okay. So basically what Ascol is saying, and it is a good and important point, is that Ascol is not proposing that the ERLC just like completely be disbanded immediately. The SBC doesn't even, with the way that they're structured, that doesn't even allow for something like that to happen. And so Ascol is basically saying that it would put the ERLC on notice for basically a year to fix everything up. It would be good because it would put them under the microscope, and it would put them in a position where they have to fix those things that they've been doing wrong and unbiblically for so long now, right? So then they would have a time limit where they have to fix it. They would have deadlines where they have to fix those issues. So that's what Ascol is proposing. And of course, someone comes back with, the Christian nationalists are trying to abolish the religious liberty organization within the SBC, of course, right? But no, that's not at all. That's not at all what's going on. I can't speak for Ascol as to whether or not he would say he's a Christian nationalist. Although I don't think he is, but I don't want to say for sure. I don't know. Sorry if you can hear I've got someone joyriding a motorcycle outside, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, distracted me. I don't know if it distracted you, but whatever. Anyway, as far as Ascol is concerned, I don't want to speak for him as to whether or not he would say he's Christian nationalist, although I think he's not, but I don't know. Doesn't really matter because he's not trying to abolish the ERLC immediately. And if you think about it, this ERLC that claims that they stand for religious liberty, if you're not standing for the rights of, and you have to think about this in context, right? So this is the ERLC within the Southern Baptist Convention. The Southern Baptist Convention is a confessionally Christian convention, of course, right? Obviously, they're Christians. And so when you have, for example, a situation where there are Christians who are murdered in cold blood, as we talked about before with the Covenant shooting. When you have a situation like that, you would think that a religious liberty organization would step in a situation like that, right? Right? Because if there was even any hint of potentially someone killing Christians because of their commitment to the Christian faith, wouldn't that be an infringement upon their religious liberty? It's just something to think about. I mean, you would think that an organization like that would do all that they could, and this just goes to show why there is that that missions drift, right? And ethics, right? Okay, so that you get into that whole thing, right? Now, is it ethical to basically posture as a pro-life organization to shoot down a bill that will abolish abortion? I mean, how ethical is that? That doesn't seem very ethical to me. Okay, so these are the things that Ascol is seeing. And so would I say that a Christian nationalist is trying to abolish a religious liberty organization? No, I wouldn't say that, in part because I'm not sure whether or not Ascol is a Christian nationalist. That's not the point. And on the other hand, I mean, I don't think that this is a religious liberty organization. Just because you claim to be a religious liberty organization does not mean that you are. And I mean, the people who this is the other thing. The people who voted to abolish the ERLC, or to basically put them on notice for a year, and then if nothing happens after the second year, then abolish them. The people who voted for this, they you could say by and large would stand. If you ask them, I guarantee you, if you ask the majority of those people who voted to abolish the ERLC, a majority of them would say, yes, I stand for religious liberty, of course. Like, what are you even talking about? The problem is that this organization has gone wayward. That's the problem, right? That's the problem. And of course, spoiler alert, the motion, the vote to abolish the ERLC was not successful. But I wanted to focus in on why this didn't happen, right? And I think that this guy, Adam Page, he hits the nail right on the head. He says, this was right after the vote, do you know why we didn't abolish the ERLC just now? Do you know why? Because abolish is a mean word. I'm dead serious. People don't want to do what's necessary because vague positivity is the golden calf of cowards. And he's right. You know, when we think about words, right? We've talked about this before, with people trying to redefine things to make them sound worse and stuff like that, right? And of course, that's not what's going on here. There's no redefinition or anything going on here. But when people hear a word that sounds mean, that sounds extreme, that sounds abrasive or something like that, unfortunately, because we don't have a lot of courage in this day and age, unfortunately, that will oftentimes stop good things like this from happening. And I would say this is a good thing. It's a good thing to put an organization that's gone so wayward on notice, right? But of course, people hear the word abolish and they're like, no, we don't want to do that. That's too extreme, right? It's very unfortunate. It's unfortunate that we have grown so weak in that sense, that we can't hear strong words, that we can't even hear strong preaching. I mean, oftentimes I've heard people knock excellent preachers for being too harsh or something, right? And of course, there's the outlier preacher who is, too harsh, who's out of step, right? Of course. But the majority of 99% of the time when I hear someone say, oh, that preacher's too harsh, I know that preacher and he's not too harsh, right? So, I mean, let that be said. So anyway, I mean, it just goes to show you that there's a problem. There is a problem with fear, with being afraid of what others think, with a lack of courage, right? Very often you have the platform in the SBC that's basically saying, you guys shouldn't vote for this. And then the messengers, which is just the people that show up to vote, they vote for it anyway, right? So it shows that there's a disconnect there, right? And obviously I know that ERLC is not the people leading the SBC, right? But they're part of who's being platformed by leadership in the SBC. And so, yeah, you can see how those two commodities are working against each other, with the ERLC and then the messengers, who are trying to, by and large, I would say, when I look at the messengers' votes, most of the time, unfortunately, they had a rough day at this convention this time, or this meeting of the SBC this time. But in the past, when I see the messengers, oftentimes they do try to do the right thing a lot more often than the SBC platform does. So it shows that they're working against each other. But yet, when that word abolish comes in, when we say, oh, well, the Christian nationalists are trying to get rid of the religious liberty group, right? When people frame it that way, people get nervous and they don't want to be looked at as too extreme, and so they back off of the position that they had. And it's unfortunate, man. We got to have courage in days like this. All right, we've got to, or else all these organizations that we like, this reminds me of that line that everybody says, this is why we can't have nice things, right? Because a lot of times when we have nice things like the SBC used to be, and I hope someday it will be again, when we have nice things, a lot of times we mess them up, right? And that's what it reminds me of in this case. It's like, this is why we can't have nice things, because we're too afraid. We don't have courage to fight for them when they're under attack. And the SBC is under attack. They have to be fought for. And one big influencer in that attack is, unfortunately, the ERLC. And so that's why Tom Ascol had said that it should be disbanded. Okay, but then, of course, I set the table for you with this at the beginning, but the Covenant school shooting. Okay, the Covenant school shooting. There was some crazy evidence that came out literally hours, I'm not even less than a day, hours after the vote to abolish the ERLC failed. Okay. This came out from Matt Walsh. Exclusive. The Daily Wire has obtained materials written by the trans shooter who killed 6 people at a Christian school in Nashville. The writings, concealed for over a year, reveal the shooter's anti-Christian, pro-trans, and perverse ideas in the weeks before the attack. In one passage, the shooter rails against Christian friends that her parents have encouraged her to make. She writes, "Parents actually believe religion can change nature. That could explain why I don't practice religion anymore. Let kids think for themselves." And so, anyway, the point of this is, as Josh Daws points out, just as suspected, this was an anti-Christian hate crime, and it was concealed by the ERLC. And of course, the day that the ERLC comes under scrutiny and that there's a vote to abolish them, just hours after that, this comes out. And this is pointed out by Megan Basham. She says it's incredibly ironic that this material should come out only hours after the SBC voted down Tom Ascol's motion to abolish the ERLC, when its leader, Brent Leatherwood, has been leading the efforts to suppress it. The public has a right to know that trans ideology and anti-Christian hate motivated mass shooter Audrey Hale. I'm incredibly proud to work for Daily Wire and be a part of the team bringing vital public information to light. Southern Baptists must ask why their leadership was interested in using this issue to promote gun control while suppressing the real underlying issues here. The effort to hold the ERLC accountable for its failure to represent the interests of Southern Baptists is going to continue. So that's good news, of course, that there are people that are going to continue to try to hold the ERLC accountable. But again, it just brings back this question, right? So what happens when an organization that's supposed to be doing what they claim to be doing actually are not doing that thing that they claim to be doing, right? When an organization that's supposed to be good, that claims to be good, is actually just using that label of good to be bad, right? And let's not make any bones about it. They're bad. They are doing things that are completely outside of the lines of what Orthodox Christians believe, okay? And outside the lines, as Ascol pointed out, of what Southern Baptists believe. Look at what Proverbs chapter 31, verses 8 and 9 says. "Open your mouth for the mute, for the rights of all who are destitute. Open your mouth, judge righteously, defend the rights of the poor and needy." And that's from Proverbs 31, verses 8 and 9. And so, I mean, there you have it, right? That the Bible tells us to open our mouth for the mute, okay, for the rights of all who are destitute. We saw in several situations that the ERLC was not willing to do that. I mean, you have these children who obviously can't speak for themselves because they had been murdered. The ERLC would not go in on their behalf and get that manifesto released. Unfortunately, they were trying to suppress it. Open your mouth, judge righteously, defend the rights of the poor and needy. I mean, are they doing that? Are they doing that by shooting down bills to abolish abortion? What about those people that can't speak? See, this is the thing. This is the problem. We have a group of people who are influencing the SBC. Certain people in the SBC, at least, in a certain direction. And they're influencing that certain group of people in the wrong direction, and in a direction that is away from a large chunk of people in the convention who actually want the SBC to remain faithful. And I'm very thankful that they are really trying to push the SBC in a direction where the ERLC gets abolished, or at least gets held accountable. And that's what we have to do. We see an organization stepping out of line of Proverbs 31, 8, and 9. You got to do something about it. You got to do something about it. And Tom Ascol did. And unfortunately, it was shot down. But I would encourage you, the ERLC is not going in the right direction. They're not. And so anybody who you talk to, if you hear them talking about the ERLC in a positive way, you could say, hey, I'd ask you to reconsider that. I don't think they're really going in the right direction. Then you explain why, and hopefully we've equipped you here to explain why that is. Okay? Well, thank you guys for tuning in and bearing with me for another SBC-themed episode. Hope you guys have a great week. We'll see you next time.